Almost a decade later, the cries to ban Reuniclus have materialized in the form of a suspect test. It's finally live. So, why am I here talking to you about Rain? Well, if Reuniclus gets banned, Rain gets buffed. Reuniclus is a major threat to it. And this also brings us to the idea of other suspects. There are many who have bandied about the idea that Thunderous Therian is also busted and should be banned. And yet there are other people still who say if you ban Thunderous Therian, then Rain is no longer viable. I am here to make the case that Rain is already awful. I'm not saying no, it's not as good. No, I genuinely think it is bad. And I am going to demonstrate why I think this. I'm going to make the case that even if Reuniclus gets banned, it is not going to improve too much. And I am going to make the case that even if you ban Thunderous Therian, it is not going to do much either in terms of affecting Rain's overall viability. Because even if you remove Reuniclus and keep Thunderous Therian, aka the best possible outcome for Rain, it is still going to have the issues I'm going to outline for you today. So, I was thinking about this, and what the next thing this brought me to is the fact that I feel like whenever I watch SPL or other Gen 5 OU tournament games, the big ones that people are really taking seriously, you don't see a lot of Rain. I wanted to corroborate this to see if there was any validity to this feeling, and I took a look at the usage stats. So, Latios, T-Tar, Excadrill, Ferrothorn, Jirachi, Lando T, Skarmory, Gliscor, Keldeo, Scizor, Alakazam, Rotomwash, Starmie, Politoed. Politoed is tied for 13th in usage. This is a supposedly metagame-defining Pokemon that is not even in the top 10. And if you look at the other Pokemon that are used in the top 10, none of them are Rain-specific. You don't have any Tentacruels or Thunderous Therians. You've got Latios and Keldeo, which are very good on Rain, and Ferrothorn, of course, but those are not tied specifically to Rain. So, obviously not every Rain team is going to have Thunderous Therian or Tentacruel even. People like Starmie as their spinner now for more aggressive purposes, as you see here with Starmie actually tying Politoed in usage, although of course Starmie actually can be used on non-Rain teams, whereas with Tentacruel, very gimmicky. So that's why Tentacruel's usage is all the way down at 27. Underneath Clefable of all things. My goodness. Anyway, so this demonstrated to me that yes, Politoed is not used as much as it should be. So there is a general idea that Rain is inherently busted, permanent Rain anyway, which I ascribe to generally, or I adhere to, I apologize. But the reason I ascribe Rain's brokenness, I should say, to the fact that if you do not have your own weather, it is unreasonably difficult to handle. That I stand by. The problem Rain has, and the problem that Rain will continue to have, with or without Reuniclus, with or without Thunderous Therian, is that it simply does not have the tools to handle a good sand team. And not only that, hang on, I gotta organize my thoughts because I try to say 16 things simultaneously. The number one tool Rain teams have for busting through sand teams isn't even a real Rain abuser. It's Mamoswine. Choice Band Mamoswine is a major threat, of course, and it's nice on Rain teams. It's good for revenge killing everything. Yeah. It's got Ice Shards for opposing Thunderous Therian, Latios, Garchomps, finishing off Sash Broken Zams. Yeah, okay, it's great, but that's not a Rain Pokemon. You can, and people have used Mamoswine just as well on Sand. The whole reason people use Mamoswine on Rain is that they want to make the matchup against Sand better. So it is pretty much entirely contingent on whether Mamo can break through that Sand team or not. So what this says is if your Rain team doesn't have Mamo, you are going to be at that natural disadvantage against Sand. And yes, you can try other things, like Thunderous Therian is obviously a big one, but they're not nearly as consistent because you are going to struggle no matter what approach you take in the hazard game. Whether you are running into a spin sort of sand balance team, you are going to struggle in maintaining your hazards against the likes of Excadrill. Ferrothorn is going to get worn down by all the million things it needs to handle, and you are not going to be able to maintain hazards or maintain enough hazards. On the other side, Tentacruel or Starmie are just not going to be very good at keeping off hazards against a sand team either. So the sand team is going to beat you in the hazard on the hazard front, because that was just the sand teams with spin. And then on the other hand, you have the sand teams without spin, but those are the ones that are focusing on Magic Guard, on immunity to spikes in general, and those, your hazards aren't going to get you very far at all. So either way, you are at a massive disadvantage there, and you are at a massive disadvantage because sand teams are defensively way more sound than rain teams are. This is because Tyranitar is a much, much, much better defensive Pokemon than Politoed, number one, and because it provides forced progress, inescapable progress. Yes, Pursuit Pun, haha. No, but because it more directly is going to impact the game. So defensively and offensively, it is going to do more. And let's not even talk about Sand Chip. Providing chip on your Tentacruel and your Latios and your Thunderstone and your Keldeo, and really, you're getting clamped down so quickly because you cannot withstand the passive damage and you cannot withstand the offensive threats. That's the other thing. Rain teams being poor in terms of winning the hazard game also extends to a defensive inability to handle... What's the number one Pokemon in usage? Latios, right? Rain teams cannot handle Latios well. The closest thing they get to handling Latios well is getting so much momentum that they can just pick it off with Mamoswine or boosted Thundurus, or overwhelming it with some sort of Keldeo or something. But remember, Latios is not used in isolation, and when paired with things like Alakazam, that's it, not Reuniclus, because that might get banned, so let's just assume the best case. Or other things like Jellicent, or Keldeo alone. It's just nightmarish. Keldeo in sand, have fun switching into that. Oh, Latios, it got Pursuit trapped by the T-Tar. Oh, well. Oh, I'll use the hazards. Oh, well, those weren't able to be maintained. So, time and time again, Rain has demonstrated itself as inferior, because yes, Thundurus Therian can do a lot, but the thing is, as strong as Therian and Mamoswine, and even certain variants of Keldeo can be, they simply do not have the longevity to break through the sand team's defenses before they are overwhelmed in turn. I mean, yes, you might pose a pretty big threat to the sand team on paper, yes, but you will not be able to pose a sufficient threat before you are in position to get cleaned up by Alakazam plus hazards. They can't switch into Latios. They can't switch into Alakazam. So we are going to now do something I really hate doing. We're going to look at Politoed's win rate. Now, please, for those of you who know that I have made a video about why win rate is a bad statistic in Pokemon, I stand by it. What I am opposed to, and I think you will see in that video that this is the exact point being made, that win rate does not tell the whole story. Win rate is a jumping off point. It's where you start looking at what's going on. People will point to a Pokemon's bad win rate in a tournament and act like that tells the whole story. And like we've seen so many cases, Salamence had a bad tournament in advance. Okay, well, there's a lot of factors why that could have been. That could have been because Salamence was used by certain players who had a bad tournament themselves. There was luck, or there was choking, they just, didn't play well. Whatever it was. Maybe people weren't using the right sets. It could be that Salamence was just adapted to well by the metagame, but there's too many factors for win rate to be... what was that expression? There are three types of lies. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. That's basically what you are doing when you use win rate as the only stat. Now, so when I point to Politoed's abysmal win rate, which is the worst in the top 15, and for such a metagame-defining Pokemon, my god, then it's a low win rate with just enough usage for it to be significant, because Politoed is supposedly a pillar of the metagame. Yeah, viable, it's an important team style, whatever. The fact of the matter is, people are not running it nearly as much as the alternatives, whether it's weatherless hyper offense or now hail hyper offense, or Tyranitar sand of all different kinds, or even bulky sand stall teams that might have Hippo instead of T-Tar. Whatever it is, the fact of the matter is, people are running Politoed less, and when they are running Politoed, they are not winning with it very often. That is the fact. So this in and of itself, I must stress, is not a knock against Politoed. We could analyze every single SPL game and say, oh, well, this game should have been won, this game should have been won. But what we are going to do now is look at the viability rankings and see why it makes sense that Politoed is struggling to find success. And then when it is struggling to find success, people recognize it's struggling to find success because of how bad it is against the metagame, and then they want to use it less. And you see how these feed into each other. If it is in fact the case that Politoed is less successful, but this has been the primary school of thought, I guess you could call it, for a while. Sand is the consistent black and white play style, because it's good into pretty much everything, except for those, weatherless hyper offense teams that don't need to worry about rain. But that's the whole triangle idea. And even if you don't buy into the idea that the triangle is pure matchup, which at this point you probably shouldn't, the metagame has evolved enough, the idea is still there. You don't want to run into a rain team with a weatherless team, because you are so much worse off against them. That is where rain's innate quote-unquote brokenness comes from. Now, less broken than sand, or more broken than sand, probably not. Do I think the metagame would be better without rain and keeping sand? I think sand is more balanced in this regard. But, that's another conversation to be had. But what we're doing here is going through the viability rankings and showing, before we also look at Thunderous Therian, tied to rain. If Politoed's not winning, Thunderous Therian's not winning. Tentacruel, yeah. So with this, now we're going to go through the viability rankings and see just how poorly rain does into so many of the top Pokemon. So Latios. Earlier, I guess I could have mentioned Scarf Scizor Rain, but there's a reason nobody uses that. Very, very rarely, by the way. I don't even remember the last time I saw it. It's because Scarf Scizor is generally a very meager Pokemon. It can't even switch into Latios safely. Doesn't even do the job against Colbur Latios, so enjoy getting hacked to pieces by hazards and not doing your job. And it's okay. It's not even that great. It's switching into Alakazam either. Same issue. Hazard's weak into the metagame as a whole. So it's just a poor attempt to try and patch up the Latiazam issue. So I guess you could also extend this to, well, if we're talking about suspects in Gen 5, what about Latios? Latios is crazy broken. No arguments here, but then there's a whole, the debate isn't, is Latios broken or not? The debate is more, what happens after you ban Latios? Would enough people even agree to ban Latios because of how much it holds the metagame together? So if you ban Latios, then the same issues of spikes and the magic garters and everything are there, which I've mentioned in previous videos, so I won't go too far into it again. I personally would love to ban spikes. Someone in the Smogtours Discord recently, today or yesterday, said, well, I don't want to ban Reuniclus, I'd rather ban spikes. I personally agree with that idealistically. Realistically, it is not going to happen. So, yeah. So in terms of why not ban Latios if it's so broken that rain can't handle it all, it's a whole bureaucracy thing. If you think you can generate a movement, to ban Latios and to stick with the metagame throughout, because people are afraid, it's going to alienate the black and white player base, no one will be left to play it. So I understand. So at this point, we got to deal with the reality that Latios is going to be around and that rain is going to suck into it, because Latios switches into rain threats. It's not countering Specs Keldeo in rain perfectly, of course not, but Specs Keldeo is one of the easiest to play around because suddenly it's much easier to play around it with water immunities, with Protect. So all the Keldeo variants, this is the whole thing I'm talking about. Whatever Keldeo you choose, As great as I think Pyapa Berry with Icy Wind and HP Grass is, then no matter what you choose, it is going to come up short in some department. And as soon as the sand gets kicked up, that's another thing. Politoed's struggling to maintain the rain in the face of T-Tar and hazards. And it's funny because Politoed can run lefties way easier than T-Tar does. T-Tar never runs lefties. And yet because T-Tar's team is always going to be more adept at dealing with hazards via Excadrill or the Magic Art spam, it is going to do just fine. Plus the fact that it makes more progress when it hits the field. Politoed tends to thunk, hoping for Scald Burns on something, and even that isn't necessarily going to do the job. And whereas T-Tar, its sand is chipping everything, and it's going to chip everything for a while because, as we've just established, Politoed struggles to switch into a lot, especially with hazards. It is not a good defensive Pokemon. And with Pursuit, that's one of the most direct forms of progress, and it's inescapable once you get it in on its target. So you can't switch into Latios because you can't Pursuit it. And if you can't Pursue Latios, you got to go the hyper offense route, and Rain doesn't really do that very well. It doesn't have the setup sweepers to pull off, the weatherless style with DD Knight and Volcarona and things like that. Also, weatherless offense is quite inconsistent in its own right. So even if you run a more aggressive form of Rain with Starmie over Tentacruel, then your defensive issues get even worse because you're even frailer. So yeah, the T-Tar thing we've established. Even Landorus Therian, it's going to switch into Ferrothorn, and here's what's going to happen. Ferro's going to get some hazards, Lando T is going to come in, and you don't beat Ferrothorn, or you don't beat Lando T with Ferrothorn, and nothing on your team really likes to switch into Lando T. EQ, HP Ice U-Turn, the most simple Lando T set in the world. No offensive investment, and yet you are stuck with the choice of either letting your Ferrothorn get beat down, and yeah, you can get hazards, but Lando T's just intimidated you, so if it wants, it can U-Turn on you and spin Excadrill. And if you switch out on the U-Turn, then it's still going to get switch advantage. And you're getting dug into by hazards, of course. And even if it's a sand team without spikes, you're still going to have the same issues of getting worn down by their offensive assault and the chip damage and not being able to make enough progress with hazards because they're going to run Excadrill. Spikes, spin, Magic Guard, it's whatever approach it takes, it's going to be ugly. So yeah, Lando T you can't even switch into. Excadrill, you don't switch into it very well, but more importantly, it's going to keep your hazards off. Ferrothorn, you trade your own Ferrothorn to knock it off. Otherwise, its lefties make it absolutely unkillable. And the whole hazard where we've established. Keldeo, you don't like switching into it in Rain because it gets stronger. So even your Tentacruel and Latios don't like taking it. And in Sand, especially if it's a Scald set, God help you, it is really, really ugly. And as much as you want to say, oh, well, I'll tech for it. That's the thing. No matter what cool sets, what tweaks you make to be better against these things. You can say, I'll run Refresh Politoed. I'll run Lumberry Latios. These are good ideas. They're not enough to keep the issue at bay because Kelly's going to beat you down, number one. T-Tar is going to pursue you. Your hazards are going to ransack you. Whatever it is, they always have the initiative. The Rain team, in order to win, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I am saying it is very, very difficult, which is why it is so rarely relied upon in big stages of tournaments. You look at something like the Black and White Invitational, and it is just, at the later stages when they're playing for money, and it's really, really within reach, it is just sand, 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 sand. So, and a lot of the best, even if you throw on something like SD Garchomp to break sand teams, it's like, well, okay, what kind of a Rain abuser is that? Aquatail? Okay, well, now the sand is up, and now Aquatail is just not really going to be doing much into the Skarmory. Or the Slowbro. So, that one's actually more of a Rain abuser than Mamoswine still, but you get where I'm getting at. So Keldeo, nightmarish, either way, any set pretty much. It can be dealt with, but it's not nearly as consistently as Sand. Reuniclus, not Scald immune. It doesn't love taking Rain Scalds, but the fact that you cannot, even if you have Encore Politoed, again, uphill battle. Latios sets are not going to be consistent into Reuniclus, to say nothing of the fact that relying on Latios to counter anything, much less something as focused on longevity as Reuniclus, is begging for trouble given T-Tar. It's this whole ugly mess of Latios being needed to counter things, and Latios being pursuit weak. This is the driving force behind a lot of metagames, and you kind of have to rely on Latios and not rely on Latios at the same time. Sand teams get away with it because when their Latios goes down, it does so having opened up enough of a hole for its teammates to take advantage of, i.e. Alakazam, and even if Reuniclus gets banned, then you can run double Lati if you really want to. So it's just very, very riskless. It's almost an advanced Ubers kind of situation. A little bit of a stretch there, but the principle stands that the downside's just stacking these psychic types, or even not necessarily a psychic type, but something like a Jellicent is very, very minimal. As long as you can withstand Thunderous Therian, that's pretty much... And you are going to be withstanding Thunderous Therian because Latios is everywhere. Number 1 in usage, ahead of T-Tar. My God. Yeah. Almost 47% usage for Latios. It's on almost half of all teams. So, yeah, the Reuniclus thing is a massive, massive issue. Alakazam, I mean, even Hazard's up, Zam is in, Rain is helpless. Thunderous Therian, this can, some ugly mirrors in this with Thunderous Therian mirrors. But I mean, mirrors you can't really complain about, right? So, the Rain thing, not so much of an issue. Yeah. So, and those were just like the sand-specific abusers. Let's not even talk about the less... I lost my train of thought for a second. My apologies. Yeah, just dealing with these other Pokemon, like the Celebes and Clefables, and God, Clefable too. It's just a very, very ugly proposition. And I think I've basically said everything I want to say. I mean, I've experimented with so many different rain abusers like Gyarados, Feraligatr, Tornadus, tweaking the sets again and again. And whatever rain abuser you go with, whatever set change you make, you are not going to get around. If you can do this, by the way, I'm all ears. I would love to see rain more viable because then we could ban it. No, I'm kidding. I would love to see, people complain, oh, well, black and white sand is so boring. It's like, well, it's the best. Sorry. And once you take sand out of the equation, then rain, runs wild, which is the whole dynamic we're talking about. So, yeah, but now I'm just saying, if we are going to live in a sand metagame, which we are, even without Reuniclus, then rain is just bad. It is just ineffectual so often. You pretty much have to pray that your opponent's team is completely incapable. Two things. Number 1, it is completely incapable of handling your threats. So your Thundurus, your Mamoswine, your rain threat Mamoswine. Your Mamoswine is used on all sorts of sand teams, and yet anyway, your Thundurus there and your Mamoswine, your certain variants of Keldeo, whatever. And you have to hope that it is both unable to prevent you from grabbing KOs with these and does not threaten you sufficiently in return. So yeah, if it's like a super bulky sand team, then sure, maybe, but no, I just cannot abide this nonsense. It feels like the only reason people use rain is when they get into a tournament situation and they're like, well, I can't use sand again, so let me, which happens, in every generation. Oh, I can't use X good style again, so I'll use Y worse style, even though I know it's worse, just for the sake of mixing it up. I mean, yeah, this is how I felt about rain for a long time. And you think, oh, well, when you have Latios weakening itself for the benefit of Zam and friends, then why can't rain do the same thing? Theoretically, it can, but it just doesn't tend to get the job done because the sand threats, the Zams, and the Reunicluses, and even if Reuniclus goes, then the Jellicents, the Latioses that I'm sure will pop up over Reuniclus if Reuniclus gets banned. The Scarfers, my God, their own Latios. How did I not mention that? I think I was mixing up with the one on the rain side. But yeah, you take down the T-Tar, and then they're going to run you over with Latios anyway. And to say nothing of the Zam and everything else backing up, and Keldeo, and God. Yeah, so basically rain is just bad into sand, and it is just an innate fact of black and white. People have been trying to solve this for generations. Well, yes, actually, at this point, in terms of Pokemon generations, but it's also just been so long that rain is just not good. And then it seems pretty good for a while, And it's kind of like Reuniclus. Reuniclus is always like, oh no, now it's not broken. Oh, never mind. A few months later, actually, it's still insanely broken. With Rain, it's like, oh, it's actually not that bad. See, look, it won this game. People always point to like 1 or 2 games. Rain is making a comeback. Yeah, all you got to do is use Thunder Asterion and Mamoswine and all this other cool stuff. And yeah, what's funny about Rain? Half the time Latios is putting in the work, or Mamo or whatever, and you're having to operate a Tentacruel in sand, and you're just like, why am I just running Rain at all? Politoed sucks, I can't keep the Rain up for Tentacruel, and Mamoswine is my biggest threat. What is the point? Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoy it, and let me know what you think.